My mom sent me a message that read, "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Ha 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 ha." 2 days later, I got an urgent email from their lawyer. "We have a problem. Call immediately." Funny how fast. The tone changes when the consequences kick in. All right, Reddit, buckle up because this story is absolutely insane and I'm still processing what happened. This went down about 3 months ago, and I finally feel ready to share the whole thing. You need to read this entire mess to believe it. Because honestly, if someone told me this story a year ago, I would have called them delusional. I-29. Male until recently, I thought I knew exactly who my family was. Spoiler alert, I was dead wrong about everything, and I mean everything. I grew up in Westfield, this upper middle class suburb outside Chicago, where everyone drives luxury cars and acts like they're more important than they actually are. Dad, Richard, is some big shot corporate lawyer who specializes in real estate law. Remember that detail because it becomes important later. Mom, Vanessa, hasn't worked a single day since she married him, but acts like she's running Fortune 500 companies from her yoga classes and wine brunches. Classic trophy wife situation, complete with the fake chest, BMW, designer handbags, and that "can I speak to your manager" energy that makes retail workers want to quit on the spot. My younger brother Dylan is basically their clone. Went to Northwestern for pre-law, never questioned a single thing they told him, follows their life plan to the letter like some kind of programmed robot. The perfect little golden child who'd probably ask permission to breathe if they told him to. Straight A's, debate team captain, student government, the whole 9 yards. Everything I wasn't and never wanted to be. Me? I was the family disappointment from day one, and they never let me forget it. See, I became a paramedic instead of going to law school like they planned. Yeah, I save lives for a living, literally pull people back from the brink of death on a regular basis. But to my parents, I might as well have become a janitor or a fast food worker. The pay isn't terrible, $67K a year plus incredible benefits and overtime opportunities that can push it over 80K. But it's not respectable enough for the Richardson family image that they've spent decades building in their social circles. Richardson men don't work in service jobs, my dad used to say whenever I brought up my career, his voice dripping with disgust. We're professionals. We wear suits to work, not uniforms. My mom was even worse about it. When people ask what my son does, what am I supposed to tell them? That he's a paramedic? Like she couldn't even say the word without getting physically ill. What will the neighbors think? What will I tell the ladies at the country club? But here's the thing that really gets me fired up about their attitude. My grandfather on my dad's side, Frank Richardson, had been a paramedic in Vietnam before coming home and starting a construction company. This man literally saved lives in a war zone, came back, and built half the commercial buildings in our area through sheer determination and hard work. He died when I was 22, but Frank was my absolute hero growing up. While my parents tried to brainwash me into becoming some soulless corporate drone, Grandpa Frank would tell me incredible stories about saving lives under fire, about the honor in helping people during their absolute worst moments. Not everyone's meant for boardrooms, Jake, he used to tell me when we'd sit on his back porch and he'd share stories from his younger days. Some people are called to serve others, to be there when everything goes wrong and people need help the most. There's real honor in that kind of work, more honor than pushing papers around in billing hours. He'd always get this distant look when he talked about his paramedic days, like he was remembering something important that had shaped who he became. My parents absolutely hated our relationship. They'd get furious whenever I spent time with him, especially after I started seriously talking about emergency medical services as a career. They saw him as this blue-collar embarrassment who was filling my head with working-class nonsense instead of pushing me toward law school like a proper Richardson should. The final blow-up happened during my senior year of high school when I told them I was applying to paramedic programs instead of the universities they'd picked out for me. "You're throwing your life away!" Mom screamed, her face red with rage. "What will people think? What will I tell my friends? Their children are becoming doctors and lawyers and executives, and my son wants to be a ambulance driver. That I'll actually help people while their kids push papers around and bill clients for every minute they breathe." I shot back, tired of her constant judgment. Dad tried the guilt trip approach, which was his usual tactic. "Your grandfather filled your head with working-class nonsense. You're better than that, Jake. You come from a family of professionals. We've given you every advantage, every opportunity, and this is how you repay us." That comment about Grandpa Frank pushed me completely over the edge. At least he actually worked for what he had instead of marrying into it, I yelled, looking directly at my mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Mom slapped me. Hard. First and only time she'd ever hit me, but it happened. How dare you speak to me like that in my own house? After everything we've done for you, everything we've provided. It's Dad's house, I corrected, my cheek stinging. You just live here and spend his money. Things were incredibly icy after that confrontation. They refused to help with EMT school costs, which was fine because I qualified for student loans anyway, and honestly preferred not owing them anything. They barely spoke to me during my training period, just cold politeness when absolutely necessary. When I got my paramedic certification and started making decent money, they acted like it was some kind of lucky accident instead of years of hard work, studying, and dedication. The relationship stayed cold but civil until Grandpa Frank died suddenly of a massive heart attack. The funeral was weird. My parents seemed almost relieved he was gone, like this burden had been lifted from their shoulders. There was some brief legal stuff about his estate afterward, but Dad handled everything as the executor and told me it was just some old business debts and a small life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral costs. Frank wasn't good with money, he said dismissively. Spent everything on that business instead of planning for the future. Fast forward 7 years. I'm actually doing really well for myself. Own a nice condo in a good neighborhood, trucks completely paid off, decent savings account, even dating this amazing elementary school teacher named Beth, who actually respects what I do for a living. Life was good, or so I thought. But then COVID hit and emergency services went absolutely crazy. I was working 80-hour weeks regularly, dealing with constant stress, watching people die from this virus we barely understood, and eventually I burned out hard. Like, really hard. Had to take medical leave for exhaustion and severe depression. The things I'd seen, the people I couldn't save, it all caught up with me at once. During my recovery period, which lasted about 4 months, I burned through most of my savings and racked up some credit card debt trying to maintain my lifestyle. Nothing I couldn't handle long term, but I needed to get caught up fast before things spiraled out of control. My truck was about to be repossessed, rent was 2 months behind, and I was seriously looking at bankruptcy if things didn't turn around quickly. So I did something I had sworn I'd never do. I swallowed my pride and called my parents to ask for help. Just a loan, maybe $15K to get back on my feet, and I promised I'd pay it back with interest as soon as I was working again. Dad's response was exactly what I should have expected. Maybe this will finally teach you that your grandfather's advice wasn't so wise after all. Perhaps you'll reconsider that law school application now. Mom was even worse, and I could practically hear the smugness in her voice. We warned you about that job, Jake. The stress, the hours, the emotional toll. We told you it wasn't sustainable. Perhaps it's time to consider a real career change. I know several people who could get you interviews at proper companies, places where you could use your intelligence for something respectable. Real companies? I was trying desperately to stay calm, but I could feel my temper rising. I'm a licensed paramedic with 7 years of experience saving lives. I've pulled dozens of people back from death. Temporarily, Mom said, with this incredibly smug smile I could hear through the phone. But what happens when the stress gets to you again? When you have another breakdown? What's your long-term plan? You can't do this job forever, and then what? You have no transferable skills. I hung up on them. Applied for a personal loan instead, got approved, and sorted out my financial situation within a few months. Swore I'd never ask them for anything ever again, and I meant it. But then last year, things started getting really weird. I began noticing that my parents suddenly had way more money than usual. And I mean way more. Brand new cars every year, expensive vacations to Europe and Asia. Mom was getting cosmetic procedures done every few months. They bought a second house in Florida, a massive place on the water. Dad started wearing watches that cost more than my entire annual salary. Mom was carrying purses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. This was strange because while Dad was successful, he wasn't buy a second mansion successful. At least, not that I knew of. So I started doing some casual digging through public records, which are surprisingly easy to access if you know where to look, and found out they'd started this development company called Richardson Development LLC about 3 years earlier. They'd somehow secured prime commercial land for way below market value through some complicated deal involving a family trust that I'd never heard of before. That's when things got really interesting. And by interesting, I mean suspicious as hell. The property in question? It was right next to where my grandfather's old construction company used to be headquartered. In fact, according to the public records I was finding, some of the land had actually belonged to Frank Richardson Construction before it was mysteriously dissolved after Grandpa's death. The timeline was bothering me because something didn't add up. I started asking casual questions. Nothing aggressive, just curious stuff. Asking Dad about his new business ventures, mentioning I'd heard about the development project through work connections. But he got immediately defensive and would change the subject. Mom would just give me this weird smile and say, "Your father's very good at business." Like that explained everything. But I couldn't let it go. Something felt seriously off. Why were they suddenly rolling in more cash than they'd ever had from a project on land that used to belong to my grandfather? The same grandfather they claimed died broke. Then last month, everything exploded in the most dramatic way possible. I was having dinner at their house for the first time in months. They'd actually invited me over, which should have been a massive red flag, because they never invited me anywhere. Mom was showing off her latest jewelry, talking about their upcoming trip to Europe. Dad was bragging about expanding the business, maybe opening an office in Arizona or Nevada. Must be nice having family money to invest, I said jokingly, fishing for information. They both went completely quiet, like dead silent. What family money? Dad asked, his voice suddenly very careful. You know, from Grandpa Frank's estate. The property and everything. The look that passed between them was pure panic. I'm talking deer in headlights. Oh no, we're caught panic. Jake, Mom said very carefully, like she was talking to a dangerous animal. Your grandfather died broke. We told you that years ago. But the development project is on his old land. Land we purchased fair and square, Dad interrupted quickly, through proper legal channels. Something in their tone set off every single alarm bell in my head. I decided to push a little harder. How much did you pay for it? That's confidential business information. Come on, Dad. I'm your son. I'm just curious how these real estate deals work. The conversation is over, he said with absolute finality. But it wasn't over. Not for me. Not even close. I left that night knowing they were lying about something major. 2 weeks later, I was about to find out exactly what they'd been hiding. And it was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. I decided to visit the old neighborhood where Grandpa Frank used to live. Maybe some of the longtime residents would remember details about what happened after he died. Details my parents might have conveniently forgotten to mention. That's where I met my neighbor across the street. This sharp 78-year-old woman who'd been my grandfather's close friend for decades. When I introduced myself as Frank's grandson, her whole face just lit up like Christmas morning. Jake! Oh my goodness, you look exactly like him. Frank talked about you constantly. How proud he was that you became a paramedic. How you reminded him of himself when he was young and idealistic. He used to say you were the only one in the family who understood what really mattered in life. We sat on her porch for hours, while she told me incredible stories about my grandfather that my parents had never shared. How he'd helped half the neighborhood with home repairs for free when people were struggling. How he'd secretly paid for groceries for families during hard times. How he'd been planning to leave his entire business to me once I got established in my career because he believed I understood the value of service. He showed me all the papers, she said, getting this distant look. Had it all set up legal-like with some fancy lawyer downtown. Said his son Richard never appreciated honest work, never understood what he'd built. But you got it. You understood what he was trying to do? My blood went completely cold. What papers? The will, the trust documents, all of it. Said he wanted to make sure you got the business and the properties so you could carry on the family name the right way, the way he'd always intended. Ma'am, my parents told me Grandpa died broke, that there was no inheritance, just debts. She stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, then got up and went inside without saying a word. When she came back, she had this old shoebox that looked like it had been sitting in a closet for years. Frank gave me copies of everything, she said quietly, her voice heavy with meaning. Told me if anything ever happened to him, if there was ever any question about his wishes, I should make sure you knew the truth. Your parents, they came around after the funeral, asking lots of questions about what Frank might have told neighbors, what documents he might have shared. I didn't trust them then, and I trust them even less now. With hands that were literally shaking, I opened that box. Inside were copies of a will, trust documents, property deeds, business valuations, bank statements, everything you'd need to understand someone's financial situation. And according to these papers, Franklin James Richardson had left absolutely everything to me. His house, his construction business, 6 commercial properties throughout the city, and about $1.2 million in various bank accounts and investments. The estimated total value of the estate was $4.7 million. I sat there staring at those papers, trying to process what I was seeing. Why didn't I ever know about this? My neighbor's expression was grim, angry. Because your parents made absolutely sure you didn't. They had the will contested immediately after the funeral, claimed Frank was mentally incompetent when he wrote it, said he'd been manipulated and confused into leaving everything to a confused young man instead of his responsible adult son who understood business. But I was 22. I was a legal adult. Doesn't matter when you have expensive lawyers and the right connections, she said bitterly. They tied everything up in court for almost 2 years. Then everything got settled quietly behind closed doors. I always wondered what really happened in that courtroom. I looked at the dates on all the documents. Everything lined up perfectly. The timeline, the property transfers, the business dissolution, all of it. My parents hadn't just inherited some small family business. They had systematically stolen my grandfather's entire legacy and built their current wealth directly on top of it. I drove home in a complete daze, that box of documents on my passenger seat like a bomb waiting to explode my entire understanding of my family and my life. The next morning, I went back to my parents' house with those documents. I was planning to confront them with the evidence, demand complete explanations, maybe even threaten legal action if they didn't come clean about everything. What I found instead was a massive moving truck in their driveway. I parked across the street and just watched for about an hour. Professional movers were loading furniture and boxes into this enormous truck. My parents were directing them frantically, pointing out specific items, acting like they were in some kind of desperate rush to get out of town. This made absolutely no sense. They'd never mentioned moving. Not once. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, Mom had been talking about renovating the kitchen again, and Dad had mentioned expanding his home office. I waited until the movers took a lunch break, then walked over. Going somewhere? I asked casually. Both my parents spun around like they'd been shot, and the look of pure panic on their faces told me everything I needed to know about their guilty consciences. Jake, Dad said, trying desperately to compose himself, we were going to call you later today. Were you? Before or after you disappeared completely? Mom stepped forward, putting on her fakest smile. Don't be so dramatic, honey. We're just relocating to Florida for Richard's business. The real estate market opportunities are much better down there. Funny timing, I said, holding up that shoebox. Right after I started asking questions about Grandpa Frank's estate, Dad's face went completely serious. I told you to drop that nonsense. Hard to drop when I have copies of his original will, and the trust documents, and the property deeds showing he left everything to me. The color literally drained from both their faces. Those are forgeries, Mom said quickly, but her voice was shaking. Someone's obviously trying to scam you. Really? Because I also have the court records from when you contested the will. Public documents are amazing things. Dad looked at the movers, who were pretending not to listen, but obviously catching every word of this family drama. Let's discuss this inside, he said through gritted teeth. No, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. Let's discuss it right here in front of everyone. I want to know exactly how you stole my inheritance and built your entire lifestyle on money that rightfully belonged to me. You entitled little brat, Mom hissed, dropping the fake nice act completely. Your grandfather was a senile old man who didn't understand what he was doing. Senile? He died at 68 from a heart attack. His mind was perfectly fine. He was manipulated by working-class propaganda and anti-establishment nonsense, Dad said. He wanted to leave a multi-million-dollar construction company to a 22-year-old kid who barely finished high school. I finished high school and EMT school. I was a certified paramedic. Exactly, Mom shouted, losing all control. A service worker. What could you possibly know about running a business worth millions of dollars? More than I knew about you two being lying, stealing criminals. That's when Dad made his biggest mistake. He grabbed my arm hard and tried to physically force me toward the house. But I'm 6'2", and spent 7 years lifting patients and heavy medical equipment. He's 5'9", and spends his days behind a desk eating catered lunches. I didn't hurt him, but I definitely made it crystal clear that trying to manhandle me wasn't going to work. Don't, ever, touch me, I said, stepping back and staring him down. Mom started screaming like a banshee. He assaulted you, Richard? Call the police right now. I didn't assault anyone. I stopped him from assaulting me. Get off my property right now, she shrieked. The entire neighborhood was watching at this point. Curtains were twitching. People were coming out to their yards. My parents realized they were making a massive public scene and tried to regain some control. The will was legally invalidated by the court, Dad said, lowering his voice, but his anger was still obvious. Everything was handled through proper legal channels, through fraud, through the proper court system. Then you won't mind explaining everything to my lawyer. I drove straight to the office of this attorney, who specialized in estate disputes. Her reviews online were excellent, and more importantly, she offered free consultations for potential malpractice cases. The lawyer was sharp as anything, probably in her early 40s, and after I explained the entire situation and showed her the documents, she got that look lawyers get when they smell a massive payday. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, carefully reviewing every document. "Your grandfather left you an estate worth approximately $4.7 million. Your parents contested the will claiming he was mentally incompetent. They won that court case, inherited everything, and then used those assets to build a development company that's now worth tens of millions." "That's exactly right. And you have copies of the original will and trust documents? Plus witness testimony from his neighbor that he was mentally sharp right up until the day he died." The lawyer actually whistled low. "Jake, if even half of what you're telling me is true, and these documents are authentic, this could be one of the biggest estate fraud cases I've ever seen in my career." She explained the legal strategy we'd need to follow. We'd file a motion to reopen the estate based on newly discovered evidence of fraud, then pursue aggressive civil claims for conversion of assets and possibly criminal referrals for perjury and conspiracy. The good news is, if we win this case, you're not just looking at getting your original inheritance back. You're looking at substantial punitive damages, compound interest over 7 years, and possibly the entire current value of the business they built with your stolen money. What's that worth? Based on the development projects you've described? Probably $30 to $50 million, maybe more. The next few weeks were an absolute blur of investigation and document gathering. The lawyer hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar from my grandfather's estate to my parents' business ventures. We tracked down former employees of Frank Richardson Construction who could testify about his mental state and business acumen. We even found the original lawyer who'd helped my grandfather draft his will and trust documents. What we discovered was so much worse than I'd expected. The original lawyer was retired, but still had all his case files in storage. According to his detailed notes, my grandfather had been extremely specific about wanting to leave everything to me. He'd even mentioned specific concerns that my father would waste the money on status symbols and country club nonsense instead of continuing the family legacy of honest work. Frank was one of the sharpest, most detail-oriented clients I ever had, the lawyer told us during his deposition. The idea that he was mentally incompetent is absolutely ridiculous. He spent months planning that will, making sure every single detail was perfect, asking questions about every possible scenario. But the real smoking gun came from the forensic accountant. She'd traced all the money flows and found something absolutely incredible. My parents had started planning their development company before my grandfather even died. They'd been meeting with investors, securing preliminary loans, and laying detailed groundwork for acquiring his properties months in advance of his death. "This suggests clear premeditation," my lawyer explained. "They didn't contest the will because they genuinely believed it was invalid. They contested it because they'd already planned to steal the assets and needed legal cover for their theft." I filed a motion to reopen my grandfather's estate based on newly discovered evidence of fraud. The response from my parents' lawyers was exactly what I expected: arrogant, dismissive, and full of personal attacks on my character and qualifications. The first hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I showed up with 3 boxes of evidence and a presentation I'd rehearsed dozens of times with my lawyer. My parents were there with 2 lawyers from some fancy downtown firm that probably charged $500 an hour. They looked confident, almost amused that I thought I could challenge them. The judge was probably in her 60s, clearly a no-nonsense type who wasn't impressed by expensive suits or smooth talking. "Mr. Richardson, these are extremely serious allegations," she said after I'd presented my evidence. "If proven true, they suggest multiple criminal violations in addition to the civil fraud claims." "Yes, Your Honor. I'm fully prepared to provide all evidence to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." My parents' lead lawyer jumped up immediately. "Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated conspiracy theories from a disgruntled family member who's clearly motivated by financial desperation rather than any legitimate grievance." "I've reviewed the bank records," the judge interrupted coldly. "I've read the witness statements. I've examined the timeline of events. This isn't some rambling grievance. This appears to be a well-documented case of systematic estate fraud." She turned back to me. "Mr. Richardson, I'm ordering the estate reopened for full investigation. I'm also ordering your parents to provide complete financial records for all their business operations since 2015. My parents looked like they'd been physically slapped. Furthermore," the judge continued, "given the serious allegations of criminal conduct, I'm referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for immediate review." That evening, I got a call from a detective with the Economic Crimes Division. Mr. Richardson, we've received the complete case file from Judge Sullivan. I'd like to set up a meeting tomorrow to discuss your allegations in detail. The criminal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. The detective was incredibly thorough, and once he started pulling comprehensive bank records and interviewing witnesses, the evidence just kept getting stronger and stronger. Within 3 weeks, he'd identified at least 6 people who'd committed clear perjury in the original trial. He'd also uncovered extensive financial records showing my parents had systematically funneled money through multiple shell companies to hide the true source of their development funding. This is sophisticated, organized criminal activity, he told me during one of our meetings. We're looking at charges for major fraud, multiple counts of perjury, conspiracy, and possibly federal racketeering violations. Meanwhile, the civil case was heating up dramatically. The court-ordered financial disclosure revealed even more damaging information. My parents hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they'd used it as collateral to secure massive loans for bigger projects, essentially leveraging my grandfather's money to build an entire real estate empire. Their business was now worth an estimated $47 million, every single dollar built on the foundation of my stolen inheritance. But here's where things got really interesting. The detective discovered they'd been quietly liquidating assets for months before I'd even started asking questions, selling properties, moving money to offshore accounts, preparing to completely disappear. They knew this day was coming eventually, he explained. They've been planning their exit strategy for a while, probably since they first stole the money. That's when the court stepped in with asset freezing orders. The order came down on a Friday afternoon. All accounts, properties, and business interests belonging to Richard and Vanessa Richardson were to be immediately frozen pending resolution of both the criminal and civil cases. My mother called me that evening, alternating between screaming and crying hysterically. "You've completely destroyed us!" she sobbed into the phone. "We can't access any of our accounts. They've seized the entire business. We're going to lose everything we've worked for." "You're going to lose everything you stole from me," I corrected. "We never stole anything. That money was rightfully ours as his family. A jury's going to decide that." "Jake, please, you have to drop this madness. We're family. Family doesn't destroy each other like this." "You're right. Family doesn't steal from each other either." She hung up on me. 10 minutes later, my father called, and his voice was cold with pure rage. "You think you've won something here?" he said menacingly. "I think I've exposed the truth." "The truth? The truth is you're a pathetic failure who's destroying his own family out of jealousy and spite. The truth is you're a criminal who's about to go to federal prison. That weekend, someone broke into my condo. They didn't steal anything valuable, but they went through all my personal files methodically, clearly looking for something specific. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 anonymous phone calls threatening serious harm if I didn't drop the lawsuit immediately. Someone called my employer claiming I was stealing medical supplies from ambulances. They even tried to get me arrested by filing a completely false police report, claiming I'd threatened to kill them. Classic intimidation tactics, the detective explained. Shows how desperate and scared they're getting. Then came the phone call that changed absolutely everything. "Jake, it's Dylan, my brother. I hadn't heard from him since this whole nightmare started. What do you want?" "To talk. Can we meet somewhere private?" We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Dylan looked absolutely terrible, like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. "They're completely losing it," he said without any preamble. "Mom's having constant panic attacks. Dad's stressed beyond belief. The business is collapsing. Their reputation is destroyed. Good. They deserve every bit of it. Jake, listen to me carefully. I think they're planning something really stupid." "Like what?" "I don't know exactly, but Dad's been making hushed phone calls to some very sketchy people. Guys who apparently handle difficult situations for wealthy clients who have serious problems that need to disappear." My blood went completely cold. "What kind of difficult situations?" "The kind that make problems disappear permanently, if you know what I mean." "Are you seriously telling me they're planning to have me killed?" "I'm telling you, I'm genuinely worried about your safety. And I think you should be too." "Why are you telling me this?" "Why help me?" Dylan was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Because whatever terrible things they did, you're still my brother. And because I've actually known about the inheritance for years." That confession hit me like a physical blow. "You knew?" "Not everything, but enough. I knew Grandpa Frank had left you money. I knew they contested the will. I knew it wasn't fair to you. And you said absolutely nothing?" "I was 19 and terrified of losing my college funding. I convinced myself it was complicated, that maybe they were right to fight it." He looked genuinely ashamed. I've regretted staying quiet about it ever since. I called the detective immediately. Within an hour, Dylan was in a police station, giving a formal statement about the threats he'd overheard. "We're going to put immediate protection on you," the detective told me. "And we're moving up the timeline for arrests significantly." The FBI raided my parents' house at exactly 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The detective called me right afterward with the news. "We got them," he said with satisfaction in his voice. "Both of them, plus 3 associates. Conspiracy to commit murder, witness intimidation, fraud, racketeering, the whole package." "What about the murder plot?" "Your brother was absolutely right. They'd hired someone to handle the problem permanently. And we have recorded conversations, financial transfers, everything we need for conviction." The arrests made the local news immediately. Local power couple arrested in massive fraud and murder conspiracy scheme. With serious criminal charges pending and the evidence absolutely overwhelming, my parents' lawyers were desperate to make any kind of deal. But I wasn't interested in just getting my grandfather's money back anymore. I wanted everything they'd built with it. "They used my inheritance as seed money for a $47 million empire," I told my lawyer. "Every project, every property, every single dollar of profit, it all traces directly back to money they stole from me." The settlement negotiations took exactly 3 months. The final agreement was announced on a Friday afternoon. Richardson Development LLC and all associated properties would be transferred to me immediately. My parents would retain only their personal residence and enough liquid assets to pay their legal fees. Everything else became mine. Total value, $52 million. The criminal trial was scheduled for 6 months later, but they never made it that far. Facing overwhelming evidence and the very real possibility of life in federal prison, they accepted a plea deal. 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for at least 15 years. The day they were sentenced, I sat in that courtroom because I wanted to see their faces when the judge read the verdict. My father stared straight ahead, trying desperately to maintain some dignity. My mother sobbed uncontrollably like her world was ending. Before they were led away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one final time. "Jake!" she called out desperately. "Jake, please help us!" I just stared back at her, feeling absolutely nothing. I ended up selling most of the development business to a company that specialized in affordable housing projects. The final sale netted me $73 million after taxes and legal fees. And legal. I used a significant portion of that money to start a foundation in my grandfather's name, providing full scholarships for young people who want to go into emergency services. I also bought back his old construction company building and converted it into a state-of-the-art training center. Most satisfying of all, I had a bronze plaque installed at the entrance. Franklin James Richardson Training Center, teaching young people the true value of service. My parents have tried contacting me from federal prison multiple times. Letters begging for commissary money. Phone calls pleading for help with appeals. The letters are pathetic. My mother writing about how uncomfortable prison is. How they don't belong there with actual criminals. My father's letters try guilt trips about destroying the family name. I've never responded to a single one. The most satisfying part? Their country club friends completely abandoned them. The same people who used to kiss up to them now pretend they never knew them. Their social media profiles are completely dead. Even my mother's yoga instructor posted about surrounding yourself with authentic people. The fall from grace was swift and brutal. Dylan and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. He left law school and became a social worker, working with foster kids. "I spent so many years being their perfect son," he told me recently. "Now I want to help kids who don't have anyone fighting for them." The training center I built in Grandpa Frank's name has been incredibly successful. We've graduated over 200 new paramedics and EMTs in 2 years, many from families who couldn't afford training otherwise. Every graduation ceremony, I give a speech about my grandfather and service over status. I've been tracking my parents' situation through legal connections. Their appeals have been rejected multiple times. They're in separate facilities, mom's in Ohio, dad's in Pennsylvania. From what I hear, they're both struggling badly with prison life. Good. As for me, I went back to work as a paramedic full-time. Not because I needed the money, but because I genuinely love the work. There's something deeply satisfying about saving lives and helping people during their worst moments. My colleagues know about my situation but treat me exactly the same. In the ambulance, money doesn't matter. Only competence and compassion matter.